The morning sun had just begun to rise over the city, painting the airport windows with a warm golden light. People moved quickly through the terminal, some dragging heavy suitcases, others clutching coffee cups as they hurried toward their gates. Among the noise of announcements and rolling luggage, one man stood out from the crowd. He wasn't dressed like most travelers. Instead of casual clothes or business attire, he wore a neatly pressed dark suit and shiny black shoes that reflected the floor beneath him. His back was straight, his steps measured. There was something about the way he moved, quiet, controlled, and filled with purpose, that caught people's attention even if they couldn't explain why. His name was Sergeant Michael Collins, a member of the United States Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard. It was the same unit that guarded the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. Those who served in that role carried with them a sense of duty that never left them, even when they were far from the marble stones of Arlington. Michael was on his way to catch a flight from Washington, D.C. to Texas. He held a small black travel bag in one hand, and in the other, a long triangular flag case made of dark wood and clear glass. Inside, perfectly folded into a triangle, was an American flag, its white stars bright against the deep blue field. Beneath the flag lay a few medals and a small envelope. For Michael, this was not just a journey. It was a promise he had made years ago. The flag belonged to his closest friend and fellow soldier, Staff Sergeant Daniel Harris, who had served beside him during training and beyond. The two had been brothers in every way except by blood. They had shared stories, laughter, and a deep bond that only those in uniform could truly understand. When Daniel passed away, he left behind his parents and a promise that Michael had given to personally deliver his flag to his mother when the time came. That time was now. As Michael walked through the airport, he carried himself with quiet strength. He didn't wear his uniform, but his bearing made it clear he was a man of discipline and respect. Some passengers noticed the flag case and stepped aside to let him pass. Others simply watched, unsure who he was but sensing that what he carried mattered deeply. He reached the security checkpoint and joined the line. Around him, people chatted about vacations, business trips, and family visits. Michael stood in silence, his eyes focused ahead, lost in thought. He remembered the times he had stood guard at the tomb, how still and silent everything had to be. Every step, every turn, every moment was done with perfection. Rain, heat, or snow, nothing ever broke that dedication. It wasn't about being seen. It was about showing respect to those who could no longer speak for themselves. That same sense of honor guided him now. When it was his turn to step forward, he placed his bag and flag case gently on the conveyor belt. The transportation security officer nodded politely and began the standard checks. The X-ray machine whirred softly as it scanned the items. Then, suddenly the monitor beeped, a soft but sharp sound that caught everyone's attention. The officer looked up, slightly puzzled. "Sir," he said kindly, "could you step aside for a moment?" Michael nodded. He had nothing to hide. The officer, a young man probably in his late 20s, looked at the screen again. Something about the shape of the flag case had triggered a closer inspection. He motioned for a supervisor, and soon another officer approached. Passengers nearby began to whisper quietly. Michael waited calmly, hands folded in front of him. He had faced more serious situations than this. Still, his heart beat faster, not out of fear but because he didn't want any disturbance to come to the flag. It wasn't an object. It was a symbol, and to him almost sacred. "Sir," the supervisor said gently, "would you mind opening the case for us?" Michael gave a small nod and carefully set the flag case on the inspection table. His fingers unlatched the metal clasps with the same care he might use to handle glass. When the lid opened, the officers leaned forward slightly. The folded flag gleamed softly in the overhead light. The medals shone, each one a reminder of courage and service. "This belonged to a soldier," Michael said quietly. His voice was calm, steady, but there was a hint of emotion beneath the surface. "I'm delivering it to his family." The officers exchanged a quick look. The younger one stepped back, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. I understand, sir," he said softly, "but procedures had to be followed." The supervisor nodded respectfully and asked, "Do you have any documentation for this, just for our records?" Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was an official letter bearing the Army's seal, confirming his identity and explaining the purpose of his travel. The supervisor read it carefully, his expression changing from formal to respectful. "I see," he said, looking up. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant Collins. I apologize for the inconvenience." Michael shook his head lightly. "No apology needed. You're just doing your job." By now, several people in line had noticed what was happening. Conversations faded. The noise of rolling suitcases seemed to quiet. A few passengers had tears in their eyes even though they didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. The sight of the folded flag spoke louder than any words. As the officers finished their inspection and cleared him to pass, one of them stood straighter and said softly, "Sir, it's an honor." Michael gave a polite nod. "Thank you." He closed the case gently and held it close to his chest before walking toward his gate. He found a seat near the window and placed the flag case on his lap. Outside, planes rolled across the runway, their engines roaring as they took off into the sky. Michael looked out at them, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. He thought of Daniel again, their last conversation, their shared laughter, the quiet moments when words weren't needed. They had promised each other that if one couldn't make it home, the other would carry that memory forward. That promise had become the reason for this journey. As the boarding announcement echoed through the speakers, Michael stood and adjusted his suit jacket. He walked toward the gate, each step slow but steady. People stepped aside to let him pass, many still remembering the moment they had witnessed at security. He didn't speak to anyone, but there was a calm strength around him, a feeling that wherever he went, respect followed. For most travelers, this was just another day, another flight. But for Michael Collins, it was something far deeper. It was the continuation of a bond between two soldiers, a silent tribute to friendship, loyalty, and honor. The airport might have been filled with thousands of strangers, but that morning, one man carried with him the memory of a single hero, and that memory was enough to make even the busiest terminal pause, if only for a moment. The airport was busy that morning, filled with people hurrying to flights, but one small corner of the security area had just experienced a quiet, unforgettable moment. Michael Collins continued his way forward, holding the flag case close. The officers who had just spoken to him stood for a few seconds longer, watching as he walked away, still moved by what they had seen. Michael didn't look back. His focus was on the gate ahead, but in his heart he felt something heavy yet peaceful, a sense of duty done right so far. He knew he had many hours ahead before he reached his destination, and he wanted everything to go smoothly. At the same time, back at the security line, a few passengers whispered among themselves about what they had just witnessed. "That man's carrying a soldier's flag," someone murmured softly. "Did you see the way the officer stood? It must mean something important." But Michael had no idea that the small scene had already touched so many hearts. As he walked toward his boarding gate, he noticed a few people glancing at him respectfully. Some smiled quietly, others simply moved aside. He was used to being unnoticed, standing guard in silence at Arlington where no one ever clapped or spoke while the sentinels walked their path. But here at the airport, the quiet nods from strangers felt different. They were human, unplanned, and deeply kind. Michael stopped near a cafe and decided to sit for a few minutes. He set the flag case carefully on the table beside him and ordered a cup of black coffee. The young barista noticed the wooden case and asked politely, "Is that a military flag, sir?" Michael nodded gently. "It is," he said. "It's for a friend." Her smile softened. "My grandpa served too," she replied. "Thank you for your service." He gave a small nod of appreciation. He never liked attention, but he respected sincerity when it came from the heart. As he sat there sipping his coffee, memories began to fill his mind again. Memories of Daniel. He could still remember the day they met, both young and new in training. Daniel had been the kind of man who smiled through the hardest days, always ready with a joke or a kind word. "We'll get through this, Mike," he'd always say whenever training got tough. They had shared long nights during drills, long talks about family, and quiet moments watching the sun rise over the base before another long day began. Over time, Daniel became like a brother. They made a promise to always look out for each other, no matter what happened. That promise now carried Michael across miles, through airports, and soon to a mother waiting for her son's final flag. After a few minutes, he stood and began walking again. As he reached the boarding gate, the airline staff greeted him politely. One of the flight attendants noticed the case immediately and asked softly, "Sir, would you like us to store that safely during the flight?" Michael smiled a little. "I'd prefer to hold it with me if that's all right." "Of course," she said. "Take all the time you need." He waited as passengers lined up to board. Some looked impatient, scrolling through phones or talking loudly. But when their eyes landed on the flag case, they quieted down. Something about the sight of it made them slow their movements, as though realizing this wasn't just another traveler in line. When Michael finally stepped onto the plane, he moved with the same quiet confidence he always had. The flight attendants guided him to his seat near the front, and he carefully placed the flag case on his lap. A young boy sitting across the aisle looked curiously at the wooden box, then asked his mother, "Mom, what's that?" His mother smiled gently and whispered, "That's a flag for a hero, sweetheart." The boy looked back at Michael and gave him a small, innocent smile. Michael smiled back. It was simple moments like that that reminded him why he had taken this trip personally. As passengers filled the seats, an announcement came over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to welcome you aboard. Today we have with us a special passenger carrying a flag in honor of a fallen soldier. We ask that you please join us in showing respect during the flight." The cabin became still. The noise of bags and chatter faded instantly. Michael didn't expect that. He looked up, slightly surprised, and saw the captain standing by the cockpit door, looking directly at him. The captain gave a quiet nod of respect before returning to his duties. A few passengers began clapping softly, not for applause, but as a gesture of gratitude. Michael didn't speak. He only placed a hand over the flag case for a moment and lowered his head. When the plane took off, he watched the ground slowly disappear beneath the clouds. The hum of the engines filled the silence around him, and he felt the weight of the flag rest gently against his hands. He thought again about the promise he was keeping, the one that mattered most. Hours passed, and the plane continued smoothly through the skies. Michael looked out the window, seeing endless clouds and sunlight stretching as far as the eye could see. The world outside seemed peaceful, calm, so different from the emotions inside his chest. A flight attendant stopped by quietly and asked, "Would you like some water, sir?" "Thank you," he said with a polite smile. She hesitated for a second, then added softly, "My father was in the service too." "What you're doing, it means a lot." Michael nodded, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and sadness. "It's the least I can do," he replied. As the flight continued, passengers read, slept, and talked in hushed tones. But every now and then, someone's gaze would drift toward Michael and the flag case resting on his lap. It was a silent reminder to everyone aboard of the quiet sacrifices made by people they'd never met. The hours slowly passed until the captain announced their descent. The sun had shifted in the sky, turning everything golden again. The same soft light that had filled the airport earlier that morning. Michael looked out once more, seeing the city below coming into view. His heart began to beat faster. Soon he would meet Daniel's parents. Soon he would fulfill the promise he had carried for so long. When the plane landed, people began gathering their bags and preparing to leave. Many paused before stepping out of the row. One man in a business suit stopped beside Michael and said quietly, "Sir, I just wanted to say, thank you for reminding us what honor looks like." Michael nodded humbly. "Thank you," he said. He waited until the other passengers had exited before standing up. The flight attendant stood at the door, hands clasped respectfully. One of them said softly, "Take care, sir. Safe travels." Michael stepped off the plane, the weight of the flag case steady in his hands. He took a deep breath as he entered the terminal, the sound of rolling suitcases and echoing voices filling the air again. But this time the noise didn't feel like chaos. It felt alive, human, and real, a reminder that life moved on, even as memories stayed behind. As he walked toward the exit, people parted quietly to let him pass. No one said a word, but their eyes spoke the same message: respect. Some even placed their hands over their hearts as he walked by. Michael didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a soldier keeping a promise. Yet in that moment, surrounded by silent strangers, he felt something rare, an unspoken unity, a shared understanding that sacrifice never truly ends when someone's story does. He continued walking, steady as ever, with the flag close to his heart and his friend's memory alive in his steps. The airport terminal buzzed with activity as Michael walked steadily toward the exit. Travelers hurried past him, their footsteps echoing off the polished floors, and announcements crackled overhead, calling passengers to various gates. But for Michael, the world seemed quieter, as if a soft, invisible bubble surrounded him. The flag case he carried was more than wood and fabric. It was a piece of history, a piece of someone he had loved like a brother, and the weight of it was both heavy and comforting. As he approached the final security checkpoint near the gate exit, a uniformed officer stopped him with a polite but firm hand. "Sir," she said, "I need to check the contents of your bag again." Michael nodded. He was used to this. Being a soldier, he had learned patience and understanding in all situations, even when it seemed tedious or inconvenient. He carefully placed the flag case on the table, unclasping it with slow, deliberate movements. The officer watched closely, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the folded flag and the medals beside it. "May I ask, what's the story here?" she asked softly. Michael paused, considering his words. He didn't want to over-explain, but he wanted her to understand. "This flag belonged to my friend," he said quietly. "He served in the army and passed away before he could give it to his family. I promised him I would deliver it myself." The officer's expression softened. She gestured to a supervisor who came over quietly. Together, they carefully examined the documents Michael had brought, a formal letter from the army explaining his purpose and verifying the flag's authenticity. As the supervisor read, his posture shifted from professional formality to a quiet respect. "I see," the supervisor said at last, looking up at Michael. "This has been important. Very important." Michael gave a small nod. "It is," he replied, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his feelings. "It's a promise I made to someone I cared about." Nearby, passengers who had been waiting in line watched silently. Conversations had stopped. Rolling suitcases paused mid-step. Even the background hum of the terminal seemed to fade. Something about this simple scene, the calm, quiet man, the folded flag, the medals lying carefully beside it, had captured the attention of everyone around. The young officer glanced at her colleague and then back at Michael. "Sir, we usually have strict rules about items like this," she said softly. "But I think we can make an exception. Just, please handle it carefully." Michael smiled faintly, touched by the humanity in her words. "I will," he said. He carefully picked up the case and held it close as though it were the most precious thing in the world, because to him it truly was. As he moved past the checkpoint, people began to notice. Some stepped aside quietly, others slowed their pace to watch him pass. A few even whispered to one another, speculating about who this man could be and why the flag meant so much. But no one interrupted him. Everyone seemed to understand that this was a moment to be honored, not questioned. Michael walked toward the gate exit with steady, deliberate steps. He didn't speak, but he could feel the eyes of strangers on him, the silent respect in their gestures. He remembered Daniel, his friend, laughing during a long march years ago, telling him that some promises were worth carrying through a lifetime. He felt that promise now more deeply than ever. Outside the airport, a small car waited. The driver, briefed on Michael's arrival, gave a respectful nod as he opened the door. Michael carefully placed the flag case in the back seat, holding it for a few extra moments to make sure it was secure. Then he settled in beside it, glancing out the window at the busy streets. The city seemed ordinary, cars honking, pedestrians walking briskly, but Michael saw it differently. Every person outside was living a life that might never intersect with the military world he knew. And yet here he was, carrying a symbol that connected past and present, life and memory, ordinary people and extraordinary service. As the car drove through the streets, Michael's mind drifted again to Daniel. He remembered the day Daniel had told him about his parents, how proud they had been, how they had always supported him. The thought of delivering the flag to them filled Michael with both anticipation and a quiet nervousness. He wanted everything to be perfect. After all, it wasn't just a folded piece of cloth. It was a tangible reminder of a life lived with courage, honor, and friendship. Back in the terminal, passengers who had witnessed the interaction at security were still talking quietly. One woman had tears in her eyes, holding her child's hand tightly. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "He's delivering a soldier's flag. Himself, isn't that incredible?" Her child nodded, wide-eyed, and the mother smiled through her own emotion. Others in line silently agreed, touched by what they had seen. Michael had not known it, but he had already left an impression. A lesson in respect, devotion, and the quiet power of keeping promises. Meanwhile, Michael's flight continued its journey. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, and passengers read or slept, many stealing glances at him and the wooden flag case. No one wanted to disturb the solemnity of the moment. A few whispered among themselves about the courage and dedication required to carry such a responsibility, recognizing that this was no ordinary flight. Hours passed. Michael occasionally glanced at the window, watching clouds drift by, sunlight painting shapes across the sky. His hands rested gently on the case. He remembered Daniel's laughter, his calm advice, and the friendship that had endured even in absence. For Michael, this flight was not just travel. It was a continuation of a bond that transcended time and distance. At one point, a flight attendant approached. She had noticed his quiet demeanor and the careful way he held the case. "Sir," she said softly, "may I ask, is this someone special to you?" Michael looked at her and nodded. "He was my closest friend," he replied quietly. "I promised I would deliver this flag to his family. That promise is the most important thing I carry." Her eyes softened and she smiled. "Thank you for keeping that promise," she said. "It's beautiful what you're doing." He nodded again. Words were not necessary. Sometimes actions spoke louder than any speech, and this moment was filled with unspoken understanding. As the plane began its descent, Michael looked out the window at the approaching city below. The streets were lined with cars and buildings, ordinary life continuing in quiet rhythm. But he knew that for Daniel's parents, life had changed forever, and this moment would be one of memory, gratitude, and closure. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. We thank you for traveling with us today and ask that you remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop." Michael adjusted the flag case on his lap, careful as ever. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the anticipation and weight of the moment ahead. He thought about Daniel's parents waiting for him, about the relief and pride they would feel, and about the honor of keeping his word. When the plane finally touched down, the cabin was quiet, respectful. Passengers stood slowly, gathering their belongings, but many cast soft glances at Michael and the case. Some whispered blessings or nods of respect. It was as if everyone on board shared in the significance of this journey, even if they didn't know the full story. The moment Michael stepped off the plane, the staff at the gate recognized the importance of what he carried. A young gate attendant said quietly, "Sir, we'll make sure you have a smooth exit. Thank you for what you're doing." Michael gave a polite nod. "Thank you," he said. It was always a balance, moving through the world with quiet humility while honoring the duty and memory he carried. As he walked through the terminal, he noticed people pausing, stepping aside or lowering their heads. None of it was forced. It was a natural respect that came from witnessing someone fulfilling a promise beyond himself. He thought again about the meaning of service, loyalty, and friendship. It was not about awards, recognition, or applause. It was about integrity, honor, and keeping the word you gave, even when no one was watching. Michael finally reached the exit doors. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the parking lot and streets beyond. A car was waiting, quiet and unassuming, ready to take him to his final destination. He placed the flag case carefully in the back seat, making sure it rested safely. Then, with a final glance at the terminal behind him, he got in beside it, feeling the weight of responsibility settle gently but firmly in his chest. As the car drove away, Michael leaned back and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been long, and the hardest part was still ahead, the meeting with Daniel's parents. But he felt calm. He was ready, and he knew, deep down, that Daniel's memory would guide him through the rest of the day, just as it had guided him across every mile so far. The car moved steadily through the city streets, its tires humming softly against the asphalt. Michael sat quietly, his hands resting on the flag case. Outside the window, people hurried along sidewalks, going about their daily lives, oblivious to the importance of what was traveling through the streets in this small vehicle. But Michael was fully aware. Every second brought him closer to fulfilling a promise he had carried in his heart for years. He remembered Daniel vividly, the laughter they shared, the long conversations during quiet nights at the base, the countless times Daniel had reminded him to stay focused, stay strong, and always keep one's word. Those words echoed now louder than ever. Michael knew that delivering the flag was more than a duty. It was a way to honor the life of someone who had meant so much to him and to ensure that Daniel's memory would live on in the hearts of those who loved him. The closer they got to the address where Daniel's parents lived, the more Michael felt a mix of anticipation and calm determination. He had prepared himself for this moment, yet nothing could fully capture the emotion of approaching the doorstep where he would hand over the folded flag and medals. The letter from the army was in his pocket, ready to provide context, but it was the flag itself, the physical symbol of a life lived with honor, that carried the true weight. As the car slowed near the house, Michael noticed the front yard bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight. The trees swayed gently in the breeze and birds chirped in the background. It was peaceful, quiet, ordinary, but for Michael, it was a stage for a moment that was anything but ordinary. The driver pulled to a stop, and Michael opened the door carefully, taking the flag case in both hands. Each step toward the house was measured, deliberate, and filled with a silent respect. He could see a small group waiting near the front porch. His heart quickened as he recognized Daniel's parents standing together, their posture straight yet weary, their faces etched with years of love, worry, and memory. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris?" Michael asked softly as he approached. Mrs. Harris looked up first, and her eyes widened slightly. "Yes, you must be," she began, her voice trembling with both hope and uncertainty. Michael gave a polite nod. "I'm Sergeant Michael Collins. I was a friend and fellow soldier of Daniel's. I promised him I would deliver this to you personally." Her husband stepped forward, reaching out instinctively. "Our son. Daniel spoke of you often," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for bringing him back to us in a way we never could have imagined." Michael nodded again, his own eyes reflecting a quiet emotion he rarely showed. "It's an honor," he said simply. Then, with careful hands, he lifted the flag case and held it toward them. Mrs. Harris reached out, but she hesitated, overcome by the significance of the moment. Michael gently guided the case to her hands, allowing her to feel the weight of it. She gasped softly as she held the triangularly folded flag, recognizing immediately the meaning of its precise folds, the stars aligned perfectly, the fabric immaculate and untouched. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her husband, then back at Michael. It's beautiful," she whispered. "Our son." "We can't believe this." Michael took a step back, giving them space, yet his presence was steady, reassuring. "He wanted you to have this," he said quietly. "He wanted you to know that his service, his life, and his memory were never forgotten." Mr. Harris placed a hand over his heart, his eyes glistening. "We will never forget him," he said softly, "and we will never forget what you've done for us." The small front yard had become quiet. Even neighbors who had been tending gardens or walking dogs paused to watch. The scene was simple yet deeply profound. A man delivering a flag, two parents receiving it, in the unspoken bond of memory, respect, and love connecting them all. Michael then reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope from the army. "This explains everything," he said. Mrs. Harris accepted it with trembling hands, carefully opening it to read the letter inside. The words confirmed what they already felt: the honor of their son's service, the recognition of his sacrifice, and the respect of the military for the life he had lived. For a long moment, there was only silence. Words seemed inadequate to capture the depth of feeling in that quiet yard. Michael watched as Mrs. Harris carefully set the letter beside the flag, touching the fabric gently, almost reverently. Mr. Harris stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, both of them united in memory, grief, and love. Then something remarkable happened. A few people who had noticed the gathering began to stop and watch respectfully from across the street. Neighbors, strangers, even passers-by. None spoke, but all paused. Some instinctively placed their hands over their hearts. Some lowered their heads. The small act of delivering a flag had created a moment of shared reverence in the world outside the house, an invisible yet palpable silence. Michael remained standing nearby, holding himself with the same quiet discipline that had defined him for years. He had performed countless ceremonies at Arlington, always maintaining precision, always honoring the fallen in silence. But here, outside a simple home, the silence felt even more powerful because it was not commanded. It was freely given, a shared recognition of the weight of a life remembered. Mrs. Harris finally spoke again, her voice still quivering but strong with emotion. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for keeping his promise. Thank you for bringing him back to us, even if only in this way." Michael bowed his head slightly, overwhelmed by the raw human emotion around him. "It was his wish," he said softly. "And it was my promise to him. That's all I've done." Mr. Harris reached out and shook Michael's hand, a firm and sincere gesture. "You've done more than you know," he said. "You've reminded us that love and honor never fade." For a long moment, none of them moved. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the yard, the light catching the edges of the folded flag and the medals resting beside it. Michael felt a profound sense of completion, a quiet fulfillment that he had never experienced so fully before. This was what it meant to honor a promise. This was what it meant to serve a friend beyond life itself. Eventually, Michael stepped back slightly, allowing the Harris family a private moment with the flag. He watched as Mrs. Harris gently held it to her chest, tears rolling down her cheeks while Mr. Harris placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes misted with emotion. The silence remained deep and respectful, enveloping everyone present, even from across the street. A few neighbors remained quietly observant, understanding instinctively that this was not a moment to interrupt but to witness. Some muttered quiet prayers. Others stood silently, humbled by the sight of ordinary people engaged in an extraordinary act of honor. Michael finally spoke one last time, his voice low but steady. "I'll leave you to your moment," he said. "Thank you for letting me do this. Thank you for letting me keep my promise." Mrs. Harris looked up at him, a mixture of gratitude, love, and sorrow in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for everything." Michael nodded and turned toward the car. As he walked away, he glanced back one last time, taking in the sight of the family cradling the flag, the neighborhood quietly acknowledging the moment, and the sun setting gently in the sky. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that something sacred had been honored, and that a promise made years ago had finally been fulfilled. In the car, Michael held the empty flag case on his lap, the weight of it now lighter than before. He felt a sense of peace that had eluded him during long months of waiting, traveling, and reflecting. The journey had been about more than miles. It had been about memory, loyalty, and the quiet acts that keep love alive even after loss. And in that silence, filled with respect and shared understanding, Michael Collins knew that he had done what mattered most. The flag had reached home. The promise had been kept, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the moment, a quiet lesson had been shared, that honor, love, and remembrance have a power that can touch everyone, even strangers, in the simplest of acts. The small front yard, now bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, seemed almost sacred. Michael had left the Harris family to their private moment, stepping back quietly, but he didn't move far. He watched from a respectful distance as Mrs. Harris held the flag to her chest, tears streaming down her face, and Mr. Harris gently placed his hand on her shoulder. The silence around them was profound, filled not with emptiness but with reverence, love, and memory. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the journey's weight lift slightly from his shoulders. The promise he had carried for so long, the one that had guided him across airports through hours of waiting and across miles of road, had finally been fulfilled. And yet he knew that the story of a life lived with courage and honor didn't end here. It would live on in the hearts of the family, in the quiet moments of reflection, and in every person who had witnessed even a part of this journey. The neighbors, who had been silently observing, now began to step back, allowing the family their private moment. Some whispered blessings, others quietly nodded, but all seemed touched by the powerful display of loyalty, respect, and love. It was a rare sight, a simple act carrying a profound message, and everyone present, whether close by or across the street, felt it deeply. Michael walked slowly toward the waiting car, carrying the empty flag case now. The sun was lowering behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange as if the world itself was honoring the moment. He opened the door and placed the case carefully on the seat beside him. As he settled in, he felt a calm sense of completion, a peace that came not from applause or recognition, but from doing what was right, what had been promised. The driver started the car, moving gently through the quiet streets. Michael leaned back, reflecting on the journey. He thought of Daniel, his friend, his brother in arms, and of the countless memories they had shared. He remembered long days of training, evenings filled with laughter and quiet moments of advice and support. Daniel had trusted him with the most important promise of all, and Michael had kept it. That trust had guided every step, every mile, every moment of this journey. As the city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows, Michael considered the meaning of service. Service was not only about duty and uniform, it was about honoring bonds, respecting life, and keeping promises even when no one else could see. This journey had reminded him that small acts, delivered with care, patience, and sincerity, can create moments that touch many hearts. Back at the Harris home, the family had begun to settle. Mrs. Harris carefully folded the letter from the army beside the flag, holding the folded cloth with hands that shook slightly, not from weakness but from emotion. Mr. Harris stood behind her, silent, a steady presence of support. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing memories, stories, and quiet laughter between tears. The flag was now a symbol of closure, honor, and love, a tangible piece of their son they could hold in their hearts forever. Meanwhile, Michael's presence in the car felt almost ceremonial. The empty case beside him was a reminder of a promise fulfilled, of a journey completed, and of the quiet strength found in simple acts of devotion. He allowed himself a small smile, one reserved for moments of profound inner peace. This was what it meant to serve beyond the battlefield. This was what it meant to honor a life, not just in death but in memory and love. As he drove, Michael thought about the reactions of the people he had encountered along the way. The TSA officers, the flight attendants, the passengers, even the neighbors. Each had responded in their own way with respect, silence, or quiet words of acknowledgement. It reminded him that moments of honor are universal. They transcend uniforms, distance, and circumstance. They speak to the best in human hearts. The car finally slowed and Michael stepped out, looking back once more at the Harris home. He felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet joy mixed with solemnity. He knew that Daniel's parents now held something precious, a reminder of their son's courage, his service, and his memory. That memory would guide them, comfort them, and connect them to the life that had meant so much. Before leaving entirely, Michael paused for a moment. He straightened his posture, a habit ingrained from years of standing guard at Arlington. He allowed himself a brief reflection, a recognition that this journey had changed him as much as it had honored Daniel. Keeping a promise, he realized, was one of the strongest ways to show love. As he walked away from the home, a few neighbors nodded respectfully, offering soft smiles. Michael gave a small nod in return. No words were needed. Respect, gratitude, and acknowledgement had been shared quietly, almost silently, and that was enough. Later, as Michael returned home, he thought about the journey from start to finish. The airport, the flight, the quiet moments in the cabin, and the final delivery. Every step had been an act of honor, and every reaction along the way had reinforced the importance of keeping promises. It was not about recognition. It was about integrity, loyalty, and love. That evening, he sat quietly in his home looking at a photo of Daniel. He placed a hand over it, feeling the warmth of memory and friendship. "I kept my promise," he whispered softly, though no one else could hear. The words felt enough, a personal acknowledgement of a duty fulfilled. The impact of the journey, however, stretched far beyond Michael and the family. News of his quiet, respectful act began to spread slowly through the neighborhood, among travelers, and even across social media, when passengers shared their observations. People were moved by the story of a soldier delivering a fallen comrade's flag personally. It reminded them of loyalty, honor, and the small ways ordinary people can make extraordinary gestures. Michael, however, never sought attention. He never asked for recognition or praise. For him, the journey had been about keeping a promise and honoring a friend. That was all that mattered. Yet in doing so, he had touched countless lives. Strangers had paused, hearts had been moved, and a simple act of duty had inspired deep respect. Days later, Michael received a small letter from Mrs. Harris. Inside, she had written a few words, short but filled with love and gratitude. Thank you for bringing Daniel home to us. We will never forget your kindness, your dedication, and the promise you kept. He will live on through us, and we will tell his story always. Michael read the note slowly, feeling a quiet warmth spread through him. It was a reminder that what he had done mattered, not for glory or recognition, but for love, memory, and the bonds that connect people beyond time. He folded the letter carefully and placed it beside his own keepsakes, a reminder that simple acts of honor could leave lasting ripples. And though the flag had returned to its rightful home, the memory of the journey remained alive in Michael's heart. He knew that Daniel's spirit would live on in the stories, memories, and love of those who had witnessed or been touched by the journey. That night, Michael lay in bed reflecting on the entire experience. He realized that this journey had been about more than just delivering a flag. It had been about humanity, respect, love, honor, and the small acts that make life meaningful. It had been about keeping promises, showing devotion, and reminding others that even in ordinary places, extraordinary moments could happen. In the quiet of his room, Michael felt content. A promise made had been fulfilled, a life remembered, and countless hearts touched. The journey had ended, but its echoes would continue through the family, the passengers, and the small community that had silently watched. And Michael, ever humble, knew he had done what he had set out to do: honor his friend, keep his word, and show the world that respect and love are never forgotten. The flag had reached home. The promise had been kept. And through that quiet, extraordinary act, Michael Collins had reminded everyone who had witnessed it that courage, loyalty, and honor exist in even the simplest gestures, gestures that can silence an entire terminal, touch hearts, and leave a lasting mark on the world.